Alright, this is lecture number 1 for Lord of the Flies. We're going to be moving fast, we're going to be hitting hard. Alright, so here's the novel right here. The first thing we're going to discuss is the historical background and the meaning of the title. So if you turn on the side of the book jacket and you look next to the copyright, you see that the original publication date is 1954. So during 1954, we're at the beginning of the Cold War. The arms race between communism and China and Russia and the U.S. is just getting started. We're just on the tail end of the Korean War. This is before the Vietnam War, and it's a time of great tension and anxiety as everybody lives in perpetual fear of nuclear annihilation. So during this time, you have this rise, this obsession with post-apocalyptic or apocalyptic literature. Now, it's still very popular. If you think of many of the young adult titles, books and novels and shows that we have, many of them are mid or post or pre-apocalyptic in nature. So, for example, The Hunger Games would be a post-apocalyptic novel or dystopian post-apocalyptic novel. The Maze Runner, Divergent, The Giver, even The Walking Dead would be considered a post-apocalyptic novel. The cataclysm that precedes this post-apocalyptic setting does not necessarily have to be nuclear in nature. It can be a pandemic, it can be a cataclysmic natural disaster, something of that sort. But in this case, in the case of Lord of the Flies, this is a post-apocalyptic novel. And it's indicative of what's going on in the historical background. As the entire world lives in perpetual fear of nuclear annihilation, within this novel, there's the background of nuclear annihilation going on. Let's look at the meaning of the title, though. Lord of the Flies. The Lord of the Flies. This title is significant for two reasons. Number one, you're actually going to see a fly-covered overlord in this novel. The second reason is it means something very symbolic, and Golding is setting a tone for us. So if you open the Bible to Matthew chapter 3, about verse 25 or 23, it says, "And the scribes came down from Jerusalem and were saying, He is possessed by Beelzebul, and by the prince of demons and Beelzebub, he is able to cast out demons." So they're basically accusing Christ of using the power of Beelzebub, which is a euphemism for Satan, to cast out demons. So if you look at Beelzebul, and you look at the translation from the Hebrew, like I said, it's a euphemism for Satan, but it translates as Lord of the Flying Things, or more commonly, Lord of the Flies. In essence, Golding is titling his book Satan. And the reason for this is that obviously you can't sell a book, specifically a young adult adventure novel, you can't just title it Satan. It's not going to sell any copies. Parents aren't going to buy this for their kids. The Nobel Prize for Literature community is not going to evaluate this thing. So he chooses instead to be cryptic, mysterious, and call it Lord of the Flies. The other reason is he's setting a precedence of biblical symbolism. He's setting a tone of symbolism. What we see in Lord of the Flies, we're meant to read below the surface. So we're going to do that as we move forward. Alright, so the setting of the novel is very simple. A nuclear war is going on, a global nuclear war. A bunch of British schoolboys are trying to evacuate, and they're evacuated on a plane. The plane is shot down because there's a war going on, and these group of British schoolboys are stranded on this island, and they have to learn how to survive. Very simple story. So, you should have done the reading for chapter 1. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the themes that are being raised in chapter 1. First off, on page 7 and 13, Piggy and Ralph come to this realization that they are alone, that there are no grown-ups about. And instead of mourning this, they start to celebrate. Yay, no grown-ups. It's a very childlike thing to do. The next immediate thing that they do is get naked. On page 7, they first make this realization, and by page 13, they are both naked. Ralph takes his clothes off, and then Piggy follows. Have you ever just been so excited that you got naked? It doesn't make any sense. But again, because of the title and because of the tone that Golding is setting, We are meant to interpret this from a biblically symbolic standpoint, but also a secular standpoint. So let's take a look at it. What does nakedness represent? Well, from a biblical standpoint, it represents the innocence of Adam and Eve in the garden. The island is a microcosm of the world. It is this small setting that is indicative and representative of the much larger world, where we can kind of have these issues that are faced by the world played out on this small scale so that we can investigate them that much easier. So we have Adam and Eve. We have mankind in his infancy. These British school children represent mankind in his infancy, and the island represents the world. And we have Adam and Eve existing in this state of innocence and unashamed nakedness. But when we look below the one-to-one binary of biblical representation, we can see from a secular standpoint what nakedness represents in our society. And I'll give you an example. If you've ever been to a sports game and you've seen a streaker take to the field, there's a reason why everybody in the stands goes crazy for him. It's because streaking and this nakedness is a rebellion. You are casting off the constraints of society in a very literal, very visceral way, and we love a rebel. So by casting off their clothes, they are literally casting off and rejecting the constraints of society represented by clothing. Let's move on. Page 22, the kids gather on the beach. They round up all the kids, the big uns, the little uns. We meet Simon and Jack and Maurice and Sam and Eric and all the other kids. They decide, let's vote for a chief. And who they choose? They choose Ralph. Why? Because he's tall and because he's handsome. It says that the most natural leader is Jack, and the only intelligence that had been shown by anyone is from Piggy. But we don't pick Piggy because he's a frigging nerd. We pick Ralph because he's handsome and he's tall. This is Golding having a little fun poking at democracy, and that's where we're going to leave off.